Again. How is everyone doing? Hopefully doing well. You've got all your Christmas shopping done and all the gifts wrapped and they're under the tree. So today we're looking at intimidating blocks, and it's not so much about learning a specific technique or skill as it is the way we approach which quilts we decide to make. I right now look for quilts that are beautiful, they're challenging, they excite me, they get my quilting juices flowing, if you will. But that hasn't always been the case. Sometimes it's been that I would look at a quilt and say, I can do that. I can make that quilt. I can teach it as a class. I feel comfortable with it, so I'm going to choose this one. And I look at another one that I might really like a little bit more, but I choose not to make it because it was something that I didn't know how to do. Somewhere along the way, by something someone said, something someone did, a book I read, I don't know what it was, but I started to change how I looked at it because I decided I really wanted to make that particular quilt. And even though I didn't have the skill sets, I was going to learn those skill sets and make that a part of my toolbox. The good thing is that I had the basics. I had those down. And I think I've said it before, but my dad was a carpenter. And as you have to lay a good foundation. You have to have those things that that you can rely on and fall back on no matter how difficult the project. And so I refer to toolbox a lot because that's what it is. As you learn new skills, you're filling up that toolbox with all the skills and the techniques you need to make whatever it is you want to make. And I think that's probably why some of you are here, hoping to learn new things and increase the tools in your toolbox. And that's what we're going to do today. I really like the fact that I can learn new things. It really has opened up a world of joy for me in my quilting again, which we all need that. We all need a little encouragement and a little head start on that. So today, and in terms of intimidating blocks, that's what we're going to look at. So let's break it down. I'm going to switch to the other camera. And that's where we're going to do a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today. And it's so fun to see all of you say hi from all over the country. It's wonderful. Texas and Virginia and the Midwest. And I've seen a few friends that I actually know. So welcome, everyone. All right. First thing that I want to talk about is that all quilts are designed on a grid. And a grid is something that has distance the same or equal components to it. For example, this cutting mat, it is a grid. Every square, equal distance. So some time ago, I decided that I really wanted to start designing quilts for myself. And so I was encouraged to pick up this book by Sally Collins. It's called Drafting for the Creative Quilter. And she talks about grid-based blocks. And that's kind of where I want to start today. And so as you can see, she's talking about 4x4 grids, 3x3, 8x8. There is 5s, 7s, 9s, 12s, 24s, all of those. And by the time you get through those numbers, even the odd ones, the 5-inch, 7-inch grids, that changes things a little bit in terms of your designing. The square can be, because you can't divide 5 equally without, that half, 2.5 and 2.5 gives you 5, but you can multiply it and get 25 equal divisions and into that grid of 5. So whatever is in your block that is an equal distance, you can divide that out into a grid. it's wonderful to sit and study this and look at the grids and try to understand how many, grids there are and what kind of a block you're making. Are you making a 4 patch? Are you making a 9 patch? Is it a 5 patch? What is? And this is kind of fun. It says play the grid game. So she has all of these blocks that she's laid out, and she has you try to figure out what the grid is and what the scale is, and take the block apart into components and play the game and see if you can figure it out. So if you've never seen this book or look at it after today, it's a good book to have on your shelf. But you can also do this with any pattern you pick up, and I wanna kind of work through that process today. So then let's take a look at this one. This block, for a long time I wanted to make, but I never really did, because to me the feathered star was intimidating. I'm looking in a book that was given to me as a gift, called Grandma's Best Full-Size Quilt Blocks from Better Homes and Gardens. And it's just a book filled with these full-size, and all of them are pretty much 12-inch blocks. So it's a big book. But I wanna take a look at this. First of all, this is a complicated grid. A little bit, because at first it looks like a 9 patch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But that's not really how you count it. And the second thing you notice is that this grouping of blocks on this side and this side are narrower than in the center. So if we take this grid apart, we're going to look at equal distances across. So on this one, this is 1, we've got 2, we've got 3, we've got 4, and this is 5. So we know that this is on a grid that has 5 equal distances across it. So if this one has 5, this one has 5. So what does this middle one have? So if we look at it again, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So now this is 8 grid, 8 equal distances in here, 5 on each side. So this is an 18-inch grid. It ends up being a 12-inch block, and so we can do the math and we can figure out how to get there. Or we can also look at the directions over here, which, is what most of us do. But if we were going to be designing our own, we have a grid that we work within, and we're looking at equal distances. So now when I look at this block, I go, okay, but I see this thing going on. Here is a triangle. We have another triangle over here, and we have this triangle in here, and I see initially, because of the value, I see all these triangles. Now I need to break this down. It's a grid, it's drafting it out, but now I want to tell you that we need to start looking at the components. The basics of quilting. Almost all blocks, almost all quilts are made with just a handful of shapes. So let's take and look at shapes now. We have a square, we have half square triangles, quarter square triangles, diamonds, rectangles, sometimes half circles, circles. Those are our basic shapes. When we get into applique and paper piecing, there's a lot more shapes, and of course hexagons and things of that nature. But we're going to look at the basics today so we can get an idea of what's going on. So now if I look at this, all of a sudden this becomes a half square triangle. So I have 3 half square triangles on each side of this. There's a triangle that somehow has to get in there. There's these 3 triangles of different sizes and shapes. And my first initial reaction when I see this block is that, oh no, I have an inset seam. But now I go back and ask the question. And the question is there a way that this can be sewn without that inset seam? And the answer is yes. Because if I take those 3 half square triangles and sew them together, I put this triangle on the end of it, and I put this triangle on the end of this, I now have one straight row that I'm working with. It's not on that angle anymore. It's a row of 3 half square triangles and 2 triangles on the end. Then I can make the same one over here. I won't add this to this side of it. I'm only going to make these 3 half square triangles and sew the half square triangle on here. So then to make this line, I'm going to sew this triangle, straight seam. Then I'm going to sew these 3 half square triangles to the side of this triangle. And now I can sew this unit that I've made to this unit that I've made, and then put this triangle on this side, and I have no inset seam. Once I start taking that apart and saying, well, I know how to make a half square triangle, and that's really all I'm doing here, and this is a flip and sew, I can do all that. So all of a sudden, this block that might have been intimidating is no longer so intimidating because I've broken it down and I've taken a good look at it. Let's look at another one. Here we got curves, and we're going to make and talk about curves next week, but I just want to show you this quilt on the bottom. You first look at that picture and you go, whoa, that's just going to be complicated to get all those colors correct and all those curves. And this particular book calls it the Fool's Puzzle. And my first thought a long time ago when I first got this book is, yeah, I would be a fool to make that. But it could be so beautiful, and it could be a lot of fun to do that. So now I look at the pattern, and they've given you the values. Each of these different values are going to end up being a different color scheme. And so they've kind of laid it out for you. And I look at this 4 patch, and the intimidation is now gone because it is simply a drunkard's path. And so I'm going to just repeat making drunkard's path in the number of colors combinations that I need. So if I need 20 of these or 60 of this color, all I have to do is make individual drunkard's path, and that block and that quilt is less intimidating to me. Here's another example that I want to share with you, because the first thing you see is, wow, it's all this stuff and all this movement and it's going everywhere. And so how am I going to break this down? Can I get this accomplished? How do I make it? And again, when you look at this block very carefully, and I hope you've already seen what's here. This is a square in a square. There's your square, and there's your outside triangles. And a square in a square is one of those basic blocks. So now how do I break this down into a square and a square that I know I can do, even though it's got all this movement and all this stuff going on in it? Let's make that middle square. There are 2 flying geese in each of these, in this 4 patch that makes up the center square. So now I can make 4 blocks of 2 flying geese. I can sew these 2 together. I can sew these 2 together, sew it together. Now I have my square. Now I need my corner triangles. When I look at just the corner triangle, it is a square with a triangle sewn on the bottom of it and one on the side. And I repeat that 4 times. And now I'm back to making a square and a square. I put my triangles units on the sides of my square, and I've completed it, and it's wonderful. It's a square and a square. but it's got a whole lot more going on that's kind of exciting, and it's a little bit more fun than just, putting a square inside of 4 triangles, even though that's a wonderful block all the way from itself. So that intimidation can go away. I want to show you when I'm trying to design something that I use a grid. And I've done this in 2 ways. I wanted to work with Ohio stars. I wanted to work with pinwheels, teaching a class, and those are the skills that I really wanted to work on. So I decided that I would put 4 of these Ohio stars together, and I've only colored in half of the block because I want to talk about this whole grid thing. So I wanted it to be a 12-inch block, and because sometimes I get into half square, it's going to end up being a half square or a partial, and it's going to have uneven, numbers and sides. I usually take my grid, my graph paper, and each square is a half an inch. That way I don't have to draw halfway through squares or whatever. So if this is a 12-inch block, I gridded it to, a 12 by 12 grid. So with my half inch, I have gridded this so that half and half is 1. And here is my grid for my 12 by 12 is going to be it's going to be 2 inches basically. So 1 inch here, 1 inch here. So this part or this block is going to end up being finished at 2 inches. So I've made those marks of what I wanted in here. So here is my Ohio star. Here's my other Ohio star, my Ohio star here, and my Ohio star here. And I've put those pinwheels in the corner. I want to show you this quilt in its entirety because it's pretty fun. This is the quilt, and when I first looked at it many moons ago, I thought at first that there were 2 blocks involved. I thought this was a block and I thought this was a block. But then when you look at the directions, it's only 1 block. But it's where the values were placed and where it came together that it changed that. And one of the things that surprised me when you put all these blocks together is that I needed a square and a square on 2 sides and not on the other 2 sides, because that the next block was going to fit there, and this would become the flying geese over here, because this was going to be part of the next block as this is part of this block. So then when I get, everything gridded out, I start playing with the value. Where do I want my values? How do I want this block to end up? This particular one, I just went with what was already there because you get your grayscale usually in your patterns. And so I just followed what they did. But I gridded it out so I knew how I was going to put it together, if you will. So I only colored in half so you could see that over here in terms of the grid. So then once I color it in, I erase whatever parts that I don't need so I can figure out how many inches things are. This rectangle ends up being a 3 by 2. The square and a square ends up finishing at 2 inches. We're going to talk about small blocks and how to get accuracy in that in a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to go into that so much today, but I've got basically 3 different blocks in this quilt. I've got a pinwheel block, which are half square triangles. I've got a square and a square, and I've got flying geese. And the rest are all either rectangles, squares, 4 patches in here. So that intimidating quilt that you think, I can't accomplish it, I think you can. If you start to break these blocks down into their components, and and then you read the pattern. We talked about that before. Read the whole pattern, because in making this quilt, the pattern has already broken down the components for you. And once you've sewn all the components together and you have your piles of pinwheels and flying geese and square and a square, you can start putting them in your background patterns, your background, uh, the background fabrics that sets the block and what you're trying to show off. It's all there. And you add that in and create the block. The I just happened to see someone say, "What's the pattern?" I took it out of this book. Again, it's another fun book. It's called The Quilt Maniac's Playbook by Nicole Chambers, and I picked it up so that I could start to imagine the blocks that I could create and make for myself. And the quilt is called Celestial Waltz, and it's in that book, and it's a lovely quilt. I made it and gave it to a friend during some cancer treatments, and beautiful quilt, and I'd like to make it again for myself. So but the book is fun, and it starts to get you excited about making new things and trying new things, but gridding things out and putting them down so that you can see the components. You know how the grid is going to work and how it's all going to flow. It works really well to take away the intimidation. And so for me, there's no longer intimidation. Now I'm going back to that foundation building that I learned from my dad. And that is always cut accurately, check a couple times before you cut, sew accurately, check on those 1/4 inch seams. Are you consistent with your 1/4 inch seams? Then press accurately and carefully. And every time that we work on something together, we're going to mention about how we go about pressing. We tend to want to iron. If we iron our clothes and we're ironers, we want to really push that iron around, and it's not always helpful to our blocks. But what I really want to say to you today is have fun. I'm going to switch the cameras for a moment. And, the biggest lesson for today is have fun. And when it's not fun anymore, stop and really ask yourself and think through, why isn't this fun for me right now? And once you can answer that question, correct it, adjust it, learn something, figure it out, get inspired. Right now, with my own personal drafting and quilt making, when I get the chance to do it, is I find things wherever I go. I am looking at things and I see quilt patterns. I've trained my eye to say, if I can look outside, could I applicate that? Right? On this hillside, I've drawn these trees that are out here because they have wonderful, fun shapes. Or I see tile on a floor. I see a window. I see something. It's just fun. And I have that sketchbook with me, and I sketch it down so I don't forget. And then I can go somewhere and take my time and really make that pattern flow for me. And I fill out my grid. I decide how big I want something so I can grid it out, and I can easily create that pattern then that works. And I always go back to Sandy Collins' book and refresh myself on drafting when I get to that point. So have fun. When it isn't fun, stop. Figure out for yourself why you're not having fun anymore. And then once you figure that out and you know how to have fun, then have fun with abandon. Go for it. And so a little bit beyond keeping and keep learning, Keep trying new things. You'll figure it out. You can do it. There's only a few basic things that you have to really know to make it happen. And find the basics within what's intimidating. So find the basics in the intimidating, and that word doesn't have to be in your quilting vocabulary anymore. It's now gone. So have an absolute terrific and wonderful week. Do things that you enjoy. Take time for rest and refreshment. If you haven't quite got those quilting gifts done, get busy, get them done. And if you are finished with all of your quilting gifts, they're wrapped and under the tree, take a break, put your feet up, grab a hot chocolate or a glass of wine, and just enjoy yourself. Have fun with this. And it was good to be here today. I will see you next week when we talk about making curves, and I look forward to it. Have a good one. Bye.